All right, thanks for clicking there. We're going to be having a conversation with Andrew Grossman of Baker Hostetler, where he is a partner. Uh, and we'll ask him about his practice a little bit before we dive into the subject matter is at hand. I did want to note that we got interested in seeing if we could speak with him after he participated in a webinar that Baker Hostetler did recently, very educational, entitled Nonprofits in the Crosshairs. Uh, Navigating legal risks and defensive strategies for nonprofits. So, Andrew, how long have you been at the firm? And what is the nature of your practice there?
Sure. I've been at Baker Hostetler for about 15 years. I lead the firm's appellate and major motions group. We take the lead on important bet the company litigation in courts across the country, from state courts all the way up to the US Supreme Court. I'm also an adjunct fellow over at the Cato Institute, as well as a senior legal fellow at the Buckeye Institute, where I typically write on separation of powers issues, as well as the First Amendment.
Readers of the Giving Review might recognize Buckeye as being involved in some philanthropy and nonprofit related matters as well. Have you been involved in that?
I've not been involved in Buckeye's current litigation, but we certainly have done a lot of work in the campaign finance and donor privacy fields.
Yeah, yeah. And how much of to the degree you're willing to disclose, how much of your work is about philanthropy and nonprofits at the firm?
So it's actually become a pretty significant practice. My background is actually in the public policy world. I was a fellow at the Heritage Foundation for a number of years, and I've worked with a number of different think tanks across the country. And, you know, in private practice, what I saw was that they were being targeted in many instances by state regulators, sometimes by federal agencies, and they needed help. And there wasn't really anyone who had a practice that focused on it, that had the expertise, as well as an understanding of the way that the public policy think tank sector operates and the needs that it has. And so we started out really with defense work and have grown from there to providing, full advisory services across the board, particularly with the addition of my colleague Alex Reed, who's really just the dean of the nonprofit bar at this point.
Mm-hmm. Uh, why are nonprofits in the crosshairs? What's going on? And I mean, I guess my real question is going to be, so I might as well ask it now. Shouldn't they have seen this coming?
Well, it's been a long time coming. It's kind of like the frog, in the boiling water, right? It didn't start off so bad, and then here we are. This is really a problem that I want to say is maybe 15 years in the making. We saw the initial stirrings of this pretty mostly at the state level through what seemed like just random eruptions of enforcement action at certain policy engaged and sometimes politically engaged nonprofits. I think for a lot of people, the first time this really came onto everyone's radar was with some of the ballot referendums over same-sex marriage and the harassment, the lengths that states went to in some instances to release and publicize donor information for the people involved in supporting or opposing particular initiatives. And then it blew up even more with the John Doe investigation in Wisconsin, where a rogue prosecutor out of Milwaukee basically shut down all of conservative advocacy within the state based on just a completely faulty and made up interpretation of state law. And so there's just been this pattern of escalation over the years where you've seen mostly blue states and their officials targeting policy-based and politically active nonprofit groups as part of just the normal back and forth of political warfare. But it's not between politicians. Increasingly, it's taking aim at civil society. We saw this rise really to the level of the federal government in the Obama administration with, among other things, Operation Choke Point, which did affect a number of nonprofit organizations involved in controversial issues, or at least issues that the Obama administration thought were controversial, such as firearms policy. And then more recently, we've seen eruptions of enforcement activity during the Biden administration. Based in some instances out of DOJ and to a lesser extent out of the Department of Treasury. And then finally, what the reason this is in the news now, the reason that the mainstream media is finally covering this is because the Trump administration has been turning its sights mostly on left-leaning and Democrat Party aligned philanthropy organizations, many of which are government grant recipients, and so that raises a certain set of issues, but also ones that may have links to criminal activities that are taking place. Riots in different cities, civil unrest and disorder, some of the assaults on ICE officers, and it really has brought new attention to this issue, but it isn't a new issue.
Yeah, and I do want to get to the news and fast, but I'm violating my own guideline here. 15 years, how about 50, the 69 Tax Reform Act, and I know Alex Reed has written about this, was in part, anyway, a reaction against what was seen as politicized philanthropy. I'm thinking of the Cleveland mayoral election and so forth. I mean, I guess I'm quibbling with your 15. I want to make it 50 plus, and one I know could go back to Rockefeller and so forth. But is this all same old, or is it getting worse?
Well, I think there is a difference in kind. I mean, has the government, tried to push uh, independent voices out of the advocacy space and try to monopolize more of the discourse for itself and for current elected officials? I mean, we've seen that since at the least the Johnson Amendment. So that is nothing new. But I think what is new is the wielding of law enforcement authority against civil society in many instances for undertaking the ordinary activities that constitute civil society, ranging from ordinary run-of-the-mill charitable programs for the benefit of the poor, that in some instances government officials may disagree with how they're carried out or who's carrying them out, to groups that are involved in public policy and that speak out and educate the public and in some cases advocate views that certain politicians disagree with. So that's what's new, and that's, to my mind, what's really troubling. It ultimately implicates and puts at risk the very foundation of our civil society and just so much societal benefit that we've gotten from it over, well, gosh, since before even the existence of the United States.
Are the attacks on civil society or the tax incentivized nonprofit sector, or are they the same thing?
Well,
Tocqueville didn't write with section signs, and the tax code didn't exist yet.
that's certainly true. In many instances, there's an overlap there, but of course, there is a large part of the nonprofit sector, when you're talking about hospitals and things like that, that haven't really been the subject of the full-throated, thrust, of enforcement actions. But I think there has been an increasing skepticism and an increasing sort of risk profile in that area as well. And you've seen that, I think, particularly in the hospital sector. There's been some litigation. The IRS has, in some instances, reformed its views on, how it is that accounting in those operations, in those organizations can work. And, there is, I think, increased risk in that sector as well. And unfortunately, I think you've seen it sometimes where the executives in those organizations wade into political debates. So I agree with you. I would draw a line between the two types of nonprofits, between nonprofits and then civil society focused nonprofits. But the problem, unfortunately, really does, I think, cross that divide.
Yeah. Okay, now let's get to the news because we are speaking on a day where there's an article that's in the Wall Street Journal. I guess we'll include a link in the material introducing this video, uh, suggesting that, saying that, reporting that the Trump administration is considering, I guess, what should I say, strengthening the ability of the IRS Criminal Investigation Division to look into that which might be going on at nonprofits in terms of their, I'll say, support of, and trying to be fair to the article, support of violence. I guess just this might have a little pop quiz aspect to it. What is the IRS CI, the criminal invest? I thought they just raised money. What do they do? Why does the IRS CI not have a TV show like the rest of these investigators? What is it, and what
You
could
know,
it do?
every federal agency pretty much nowadays has criminal investigators, from the EPA to the Forest Service, and the IRS is no exception. The CI division of the IRS pursues potential criminal charges, and in many cases, those can involve, finance-based crimes that then overlap in various ways with tax law. So these can often be part of broader investigations that may implicate and involve other components of the government.
Would it pursue the charges or make referrals to somebody who would?
Ultimately, it would be a referral to the Department of Justice. So, I mean,
Hmm.
at the end of the day, if you're talking about a criminal charge, it's going to be brought by the U.S. Department of Justice. But you can still see aspects of this if you're on the receiving end of this sort of investigation through investigative activities.
Hmm.
Which could be interviews, which could be subpoenas. All sorts of just ordinary investigative activities.
Hmm. I do just
And,
want
and
to, yep, go ahead.
And I
Sorry.
was going to say, what was so interesting about the journal's report today was that the IRS apparently looked into using what's known as the doctrine of illegality and determined that at least at the federal level, that was a little bit too cumbersome to operate on the timeline that they were hoping to operate. The doctrine of illegality holds that a charity uh, can't pursue either unlawful purposes or illegal purposes. Um, and illegal is relatively straightforward, but things that are against public policy also run afoul of the doctrine against illegality. So the classic example is a school for pickpockets. It's certainly legal to operate a school, but that's clearly not going to be in the public interest, and it's not something that should be subsidized through the tax code or through the way that charities are addressed under state law either. Um, the doctrine hasn't really been put to all that much use, but it's really been the focus of increasing attention in recent years, particularly because of so many of the activities that we've seen, really that the Trump administration is focusing on now. The seeming relationships between many of the large progressive donors and progressive foundations and groups that and individuals that in some instances appear to be involved in criminal activity. And there's this huge, I would say that a, it's a little bit one-sided because this is not a problem that I'm aware of that foundations on the conservative side, the free market side, seem to have. They don't tend to have relationships with community organizing type groups. They don't tend to have relationships or fund groups that engage in direct action. They don't tend to fund or have relationships with groups that operate in areas overseas that are controlled by foreign terrorists. And so there really is this asymmetry where there is this whole set of potential illegality issues that is, I think, a very serious matter for a lot of the progressive philanthropic movement, but doesn't necessarily have a lot of resonance on the other side of the fence just because they pursue different strategies.
Hmm. Well, that's one step towards, isn't it, an acknowledgement that enforcement in this one area and not another is ideologically motivated, or is it not?
I don't think it is necessarily. I think it's really an application of neutral principles because it's always been the principle that a charity and charitable funds shouldn't be used for unlawful conduct. And, it's not something I think that's appropriate for a charity to do to turn a blind eye to grant recipients using money, resources, connections, and so forth to carry out unlawful activities. And I think there's been this nonchalance among a lot of the progressive philanthropy community, kind of just looking the other way or laughing it off that, oh, there will be some excesses among the very enthusiastic groups that we work with on so many of our policy initiatives. And I think that was detrimental to them. To the donors and to the foundations, just in terms of their own missions, because it's something that fosters distrust and that fosters, I think, appropriately public skepticism about what it is that they're trying to pursue. But at the end of the day, if you want to be pragmatic about it, it also is illegal, and it always has been. And I think that there was for many years the government really did turn a blind eye to these activities, but I don't think it means that they were ever approved or that they were ever appropriate. So, if that is what the Trump administration is focusing on, and that's what the news reports seem to indicate, it's going to be one-sided, but that doesn't mean that it's going to be political.
So what would strengthening the IRS CI, what additional arrow is in the quiver with that that didn't exist before. I guess the time, speed, that I get, but it's public policy, just which is not apparently not a statute. Well, it's not. But why did they have to pivot, as it were, from looking into the regular illegality doctrine? And I know there's not much meat on the bones here. We're putting it on. I guess that's what I'm asking you to do. What's the benefit from strengthening IRS CI? Is it the public policy doctrine
Well,
would have to be defined by a judge?
no, I don't think that's it at all. In fact, I think it's kind of the opposite. So, the problem that people always have with the doctrine of illegality is that its edges are very hard to define. There's only so much case law that's out there. There is a decent amount of case law at the state level, so it's not nothing. But it can be a little bit fuzzy in terms of how it applies. And so that makes it susceptible to the charge that it's being applied in an unequal, arbitrary fashion, that people don't know what the law is, they don't know what's required and expected of them. That's not going to be true with the sorts of criminal charges that, if they are brought, would be pursued, through this new initiative, because the criminal law tends to be very well defined. You're talking about particular events, particular offenses, and the kinds of questions I assume they're going to be looking into is, who gave money to whom? Did they give it to fund particular unlawful activities? Was there knowledge that this money was being used for unlawful activities? You know, we already know that there have been, that in a lot of major cities there are community organizing groups and their affiliates that have been involved in unlawful protest, blocking streets, blocking access to federal buildings, blocking federal officers in the carrying out of their duties, violence, threatened violence. And so the question is going to be, what is the relationship between those activities and the people carrying out those activities and philanthropic organizations? And if the relationship is one of control, if the relationship is one of deliberate funding, aiding and abetting, assisting them in various ways, that would support criminal, at least investigation, and ultimately potentially criminal charges under probably any interpretation of the law, because those are illegal activities. So I think the real shift here is really in terms of enforcement priorities. It's not necessarily a shift in terms of what the law is.